the agreed upon terms in the memorandum of understanding through council, finalizing the memorandum, signing the memorandum, and eventually completing the transfer. So as mentioned, the state of good repair cost is a key piece of this entire process. It's kind of the core piece of negotiations with MDOT. We are recommending $82 million as a starting point for those negotiations. Estimates for Jackson, Huron, and Washtenaw came from similar MDOT tip projects, and then were escalated up to $2028, which is what we use as the base here for construction. Estimates for North Main Street actually comes from an existing MDOT reconstruction estimate, and then similarly escalated up to $2028. I think, again, to underscore this $82 million value, this is meant to serve as a starting point. MDOT, it's very possible that they're going to find this number very high, but again, this is a starting point for negotiations. So as mentioned earlier in the cost section, all of the costs within the benefit cost analysis are assumed to be borne by the city. They're essentially blind to who is responsible for the cost. It is worth noting, however, that significant state of good repair funding from MDOT is a component of the jurisdictional transfer. That value is unknown. That's the result of the negotiations. However, if that capital cost does come from MDOT for additional state of good repair funding and offsets a lot of those capital costs that were included in the benefit cost ratio, or in the benefit cost analysis, it could change some of these benefit cost ratios pretty dramatically. So again, this is not our benefit cost ratio. This is a hypothetical benefit cost ratio. If state of good repair funding from the estimates in the previous slide were included in the analysis to offset those initial capital costs. So you can see that the benefit cost ratios do change fairly substantially when you have some of those capital costs offset. So just to wrap up, there's quite a bit to consider when assessing whether to pursue this. I think on the pros side, that the city would gain complete control of the roadways, including design, maintenance, operation, function. It really does give the potential to unlock changes that would move the city closer to a lot of the stated long-term goals. However, the process does come at a real cost. This includes capital improvement costs, ongoing costs for maintenance, as well as just the general responsibility to having to maintain those trunk lines once they become part of the city's roadways. So with that, thank you, and I will open it up to questions.
Thank you. Yeah, I was hoping to just make a couple comments because there's a couple of points I really like to hammer home that I think Jake hits them, well, but it's really, really important to understand. When we do this benefit cost ratio, this is not a benefit cost ratio of the benefit to Ann Arbor of doing a jurisdictional transfer. It's not. This isn't like a black box science of if it's more than one, you should do the transfer. If it's not less than one, you shouldn't do the transfer. There is certainly no federal approved method for making a decision like that. So it provides you with information. It provides you with a lot of information on what are the benefits of different sections that you could have, and there are opportunities that you could possibly realize if you completely controlled what you did with the corridors. So I just wanted to, hammer that down just a little bit more. Also, we've talked to Kalamazoo, we've talked to Grand Rapids, we've looked at this for you. This is not a moneymaker. It's you will get 1% less funding to take care of 2.5% more, and that's actually by lane miles. I think it was like 3.5 by centerline miles. It's like 3.5% more by lane miles, right, Jake?
Yeah, I think it's 3.4%.
Yeah. So you're going to have to do more with less, at least more with less from the city. And one other thing that's important to mention in this also is we're doing this benefit cost ratio, and we're looking at certain things as benefits. There's one key component that MDOT would jump up and down about a disbenefit when you take a bus lane, when you take a lane and you turn it into a transit lane, it does change the experience for a person in their own private vehicle. They're going to see more congestion. A lot of times you would record that as a disbenefit, the hours of delay for those drivers. That is not included as a disbenefit in this. It's a subjective thing. I don't think the city of Ann Arbor wants to encourage the single occupancy vehicles driving down through the main street. And we weren't doing the modeling to actually calculate how much delay there would be anyway in this study. But it's noticeably absent from the cost benefit analysis is any consideration for delay to the personal car driver. I just wanted to make those 3 points and really hit them hard before we open it up to questions, so people have a good handle on the information that's being provided.
All right, thank you. What questions and comments do we have for this goes to council? Yeah, Molly.
Thanks so much. This was really interesting, and I especially appreciated seeing the sort of the adjusted benefit cost analysis with the funding that's likely to come from MDOT to bring the roads up to good repair. I'm curious about the ways that pedestrian safety in particular, are quantified. So like Jackson Road was ranked sort of by far the lowest in terms of cost benefit analysis, but we also know that it's one of the deadlier roads in Ann Arbor. People have been killed on it, and I don't know where that, like, are we putting a dollar value on human life? And if so, what does that look like?
Yeah, so the general methodology for that with the US DOT BCA guidance is you kind of establish a baseline. So whatever the project extent is, whether it's an intersection improvement or a corridor improvement, how many types of, or how many crashes and what severity of crash have you seen on an annual basis before making some kind of improvement? And then those improvements will have something called a CMF, which is a crash modification factor applied to it. So say you put in a bump out, that bump out is expected to see a 33% reduction in pedestrian crashes. So from the installation date of that bump out through the end of the benefit cost analysis, you could expect to see 33% reduction in however many crashes were the baseline. The US DOT does assign values in dollars to reduction in crashes by injury severity. So there's different values for a fatal crash, an A injury crash, a B injury crash. The reason that Jackson has a low benefit is that we didn't actually include a lot of improvements in those hypothetical concepts. So Main Street, there was a lot of things that are changing. And so we can take that baseline, we can add the changes, and then see the benefits that are going to be realized from those changes. Jackson, that there just weren't as many improvements within the concepts.
So just to follow up.
If I could, Molly, I'm sorry to jump in. If I could clarify that though too, part of the reason why those benefits can't be extrapolated further outward is because Jackson's already been dieted. It has the bike facilities, and we already have a project programmed for those crosswalk improvements. So that is already assumed to be implemented as part of this analysis. It was not above and beyond because we have concurrence from MDOT on those. We have funding for that. We have design ongoing, and we're actually on the cusp of actually moving forward with that project. That we just assume that as part of the existing condition, even though those crosswalks are
there. Thank you. That's super helpful. But so in theory, despite all of the improvements that are already there, you know, on non-MDOT roads, we're able to do a lot more tweaking in the city. Like if we make adjustments to everything from signal timing to to things like crosswalks. if we took over those roads, we would have that freedom to continue to make those improvements, even if they're not currently programmed, whereas we would not if we did not get it from MDOT. Is that a fair statement?
That's right.
Yeah. Thanks.
Right, Peter?
I've got a comment and then a couple of questions. The first one is that the intersection of Jackson and Maple on the west side is 7 lanes long, 7 lanes wide. 7 lanes inside the city of Ann Arbor, 7 lanes wide. To say that there are no improvements that we could make on that part of Jackson, I think is incorrect. We need fewer than 7 lanes there, and we need tighter radiuses on the turns. It is a terrible intersection to cross. It's a hellscape. And I really can't believe that there's no improvements we could make there. I do not agree with that. So I've got a couple of questions beyond that, also related to Jackson. If there is indeed less to do there, then it seems to me that the denominator for this benefit cost ratio that we're looking at would be smaller. And therefore we have a small benefit because there's not much to do, but we have a small cost because there's not much to do. So I don't understand how we come up with this cost benefit ratio that is 2 orders of magnitude smaller than the other projects. I guess I'd like some more details on that. The other question I have then is we had slide 6 that we said described us doing more with less. And the way I interpret slide 6 is that we're going to do the same with 200,000 less. I mean, as I understand it, we are already maintaining these roads and getting the trunk line maintenance reimbursement for them. So maybe I'm misunderstanding that and need some clarification, but it looks to me like we're doing the same with $200,000 less, not taking on extra responsibility and also losing money. So if we could get some clarification on that. And then my third question is, when we look at all of these projects together, we had that last slide of benefit cost ratio that we were just on. That one, right. If we were to add up all those together, if we take all the projects together as a whole, what does that look like? And does it make sense to analyze them that way? Like if we just totally get MDOT out of the picture, what is that number, red or green? Just curious. So those are my 3 questions. And
I can answer that.
Also, thank you very much for doing this. Appreciate all the effort.
Yeah.
No
Jake, how about I answer the easy one, Jake?
Yeah, go for it. Which one's that?
The middle one was the easy one. And the main thing there is you're getting, the $200,000 to $250,000 less in maintenance, but now you're not only responsible for maintenance, you're responsible for the capital improvements and the capital maintenance and resurfacing it every 7 years, and that DOT was always doing. So that's why there's a lot more cost to you, because now you have 3.5% more roads that you have to do the capital maintenance and the capital improvements on into the future.
I think that. Oh, go ahead. I was gonna say that kind of answers the first question about Jackson. The biggest sort of denominator of the benefit cost ratio here is that capital maintenance, because we assumed a 7-year single course overlay for all of these. So ongoing, that 17% of the cost that was capital maintenance, that's still included in Jackson. And then I guess for the third one to combine, what would this look like if it were combined? I mean, these all have different values, so it'd be a weighted average, but I do suspect it would be green. It's certainly something we can do. But similarly, like like you had pointed out with Jackson, the numerator and the denominator for this 0.2 or 0.02 are substantially smaller values than all of the rest of them. So although this is red for this individual segment, if it was part of a weighted average with all of the different segments, I do suspect it would be green.
Okay, thank you. And thanks again for doing this.
Matt?
Well, thank you for the presentation. I asked a question in the chat, and Brett, it may be to you or to Raymond. First, I got a couple of questions, but the first one's just, what's our role as a commission in this study? Are we simply receiving this information? Are we being asked to approve it? I feel like council commissioned it and it's going to council, so could someone clarify what this commission's role is?
Yeah, this is just information and discussion. There's no vote. They're not looking for a recommendation on this. If it were to go to council, council might make a determination, and then perhaps that would, whatever determination or course that council decides to follow, might come back to us for a recommendation. Maybe not.
Sure.
But there's nothing tonight that we're voting on. This is just for information.
Okay. In that case, maybe some methodological questions over to the consultants. And I run the local transit agency, and I'm familiar with Act 51's transit funding, but I confess I'm pretty ignorant about its roadway funding stipulations. Based on this conversation, it sounds like MDOT is reimbursing the city for doing maintenance on it. If we were to buy that, help me understand, like I'm 5 years old. Obviously, we're paying for the facilities. We're buying it from them.
We're not.
How is the revenue working? I'm not sure I'm following that very fundamental part. Like, are they giving us something, or I'm a little turned around?
From what we've heard from Trevor and Raymond, they would happily give it to you. So you're not buying anything. They would love Ann Arbor to be out of their hair and take this over. That's what we've heard anyway. The issue. I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to fully understand the question.
Well, let me take a crack at it. The state would have a responsibility to turn it over within a certain standard of care and maintenance, and so the roads aren't necessarily in that condition right now. So they would actually have to pay you, most likely they would either have to bring it up to that condition, or they would pay you to the city to bring it up to that condition. So the city would not have to buy the roads. They would be accepting the roads from MDOT and actually accepting a dollar value to be determined, because they need to do some maintenance to get it up to like a minimum level of quality.
And then the city would be, based on getting that, the city in the MOU, there's also usually timeframes where the city would have to, since they got that money, they would have to do that work within certain timeframes to meet their end of the MOU.
Sure.
And then if I could maybe add another clarification, just using some different words. Currently, the city gets, I'll say, operational money for the trunk lines, right? We operate the signals, the signs and signals team does. We plow the trunk lines, and MDOT reimburses us for that work. That would go away, right? And then I think then there's a question about maintenance, right? Just, the resurfacing or the capital costs, like those squarely fall on the city. So I think that helps explain why some of the money that the city is getting to, I'll use the word operate, even though there's maybe some small maintenance in there as well. All of that goes away once we own it.
So even if there's no initial purchase price, and even if maybe MDOT has to give us some money because the roads are in such bad shape today, the city would afterwards would assume all costs and full control of the facilities in perpetuity going forward. Which leads me to my next question about life cycle costing. How far, and I think I'm getting into capital stuff here, like a repaving to make it pretty for 7 years. I don't know much about street work, but I know that that pales compared to the fundamental rebuilding of a facility from the ground up, stripping it down, forget the asphalt, down into the gravel. That's heavy duty construction. That is extremely expensive. Is that taken into account in your calculations, or is there some sort of like horizon cutoff for this work?
It's 20 years for the benefit costs. So it's generally you do a benefit cost analysis for 20 to 30 years per guidance, depending on the type of project. We only included costs for reconstruction for Main Street because that is the existing state of good repair estimate, is that it does need a total reconstruction. But for the other segments, it was just the 7 years single course overlay.
And the decision to not include reconstruction costs for those other segments was based on like the engineering assessments of those roads, or just estimates based on the last time it was done?
Yeah, and let me just jump in for a second, because when we were doing what, trying to figure out what MDOT should provide you, it's different than what we think you should do with the road to bring, to really improve the road. So those numbers end up being different. So for I think it was, Washtenaw is in lousy shape, right? But if they did a heavy mill and fill on Washtenaw, it could last for 5 years. And that's really what they'd be responsible for. The way the law is written, it has to be in a state of good repair for 5 years. That's not what you should do with that road if you were going to, rebuild it the way we've talked about rebuilding it. So you do have a heavier capital cost than just a mill and fill. And then after that heavier capital cost, you have an assumption, but you could do this for a long time and your road will be okay, to do a 7-year, resurfacing as, for the next 20 years to figure out, what your life cycle costs would be in there.
I appreciate it. And, I'm not going to bore everyone else with my education on Act 51. I don't need to weigh in on it. So thank you all very much, and I'll go educate myself.
Okay.
Thank you. Lisa?
First, thanks so much for bringing this presentation today. Really interesting stuff. I have 2 questions. One relates to next steps. The second is a clarification. So first, if this goes to council, is the expectation that, would they need to consider proceeding with all 6 segments? Or is there the potential for, potentially not moving forward with one of the segments? I don't have a good sense of this is an all or nothing kind of consideration.
Trevor, did you want to answer that? You answered it so well this morning.
Thanks, Dave. We suspect that MDOT would like, if a transfer takes place, it's for all of them. There is the possibility that that one non-connecting segment could be left behind, but I'm not sure exactly why MDOT would see that to their advantage. It would all take place in the negotiation.
Okay.
And the segmentation is broken up for the purpose of analysis more than the function of the transfer.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
And MDOT wouldn't want a dead end in the middle of the city.
I'm happy
that's the key.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that response, just because in preparation for this meeting, I noted some public discourse around like social media and other sites speculating around that. So that's helpful clarification. And my second question, I think, David, I heard you assert that MDOT would love to give these segments over to Ann Arbor's jurisdiction, but I think one of the documents in the packet called out that the process of jurisdictional transfer can take years to complete. And so I'm wondering kind of what your thinking is around hypothetical turnaround times if this is to move forward, between taking it to council versus actually getting to an MOU.
I think the cases we've seen have been around 5 years. So it's a long time. Could this one possibly go quicker because MDOT is motivated? Maybe, but it really comes down to do they have $82 million to give you right now, and are they willing to do that? In different cases, it seems like they act differently at the divisional level to some extent. Kalamazoo, I think, had a very different experience than Grand Rapids did. Kalamazoo, from the very early on stages, they were hand in hand with MDOT estimating the cost to bring it up to a state of good repair. They did that more together in that case. Here, I think this study was a really good thing to do because it provides you a lot of information before you go into that negotiation and work with MDOT. So a lot of it ends up being budgeting. When do they have the money? There's a lot of details in that MOU about timing as well. And do they have it budgeted? They probably can't give you $82 million in 1 year, so all that has to be worked out. And I think a lot of that takes a lot of time.
Thank you.
Molly.
I'd like to make a motion to make a recommendation to council to proceed with all the trunk line transfers. I know it's not on the agenda, but I'm pretty sure we're allowed to make motions anyway.
Can I second it?
Yeah, I mean, typically action items we tend to show on the agenda as action items, and this was not shown as an action item. I'd be a little hesitant to do that. I think there is a protocol whereby you could amend the agenda to identify it as an action item. So what I might suggest, and I know, Molly, this is your last meeting, but if that is the pleasure of the commission, that we bring something back to you as a formal agenda item, like with a formal action at the next meeting. So then that way it's out there for everybody. For what it's worth, we don't, because of council's entering budget deliberations, council's received the report, but probably won't receive the presentation for a couple months yet. So they'll have, you'll have time before your recommendation needs to get to them.
Can I make a motion to amend the agenda?
Yeah, I think we can do. Maybe let's hear from our council member Erica first, real quick. Is that all right?
Fine.
All right. Yeah, Erica.
Yeah, I was going to ask a question, an unrelated question. I do think that it'll be important for Transportation Commission to weigh in on this. I take Raymond's point that we actually aren't going to be considering this for a little bit of time. So if it, there's, while I can understand the desire to vote on it this evening, I think procedurally there's not necessarily that need to urgently do it tonight. But I can understand the excitement around it. So, if folks feel like they know where they're at, I'm not sure that I think that the larger conversation around this will likely happen at the input will happen coming to city council rather than transportation. So I'm less concerned about the public notification on that issue. But my question was around sort of the timeline issue in terms of the length of time that this might take to do negotiations. And obviously North Main is a project that MDOT has currently been working on with the city. Obviously we would, if this was under our jurisdictional control, as the presentation showed, there'd be a lot of improvements that we would probably want that would never pass muster with MDOT going through this. But is there any feedback or sense around the benefit of proceeding with that reconstruction so that the road is in, strong, good repair, and then, simultaneously continuing to work on, what that negotiated agreement would be with MDOT. Obviously that dollar amount would come down because reconstruction would be out of it. But I'm just curious if any of those conversations have happened around thinking about that timing and specifically that project.
Yeah, there's a couple things that you're probably not going to get the project you want if you have them do the project. When we were doing our estimate for what it would take to bring the roads up to a state of good repair, I want to say we kind of took a liberty in noticing that MDOT had this programmed for reconstruction, so that must mean that's what it would need. Could they do something less? Could they argue they could do something less and it would be up to state of good repair for 5 years? Yeah, they probably could. So I really worry about that a little bit. But so in our estimate of this $82 million, we said, you said it needed a full reconstruction. It needs a full reconstruction. This is the cost, so I think it helps you as far as, what you're, the money that you could get to do the job the way you want it, because once they do it, and if they do, what is it, the 4-lane section out there, you're not going to have the sidewalks, so you're going to be stuck with that, or you're just going to have to pay to rip some of it up to make it what you want it to be in the future.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I want to give Molly an opportunity again to make her motion if she so desires, and see if there's a second.
Thanks. I bet we can really fast. So I move to amend the agenda to add a resolution to recommend moving forward with all the trunk line transfers.
Is there a second?
I see Pete.
Seconded by Peter. Okay, we have an agenda item. Let's do that after we go finish up the questions, and then we can take up that agenda item. Is that all right?
I think we have to vote. Don't we have to vote on the agenda?
Yeah. Sorry, it's just seconded. So, if we could stop sharing for a moment, just so we could do the vote. A vote on the motion to modify the agenda to add an item that would be a recommendation to City Council to take up the trunk line transfer of all segments. This is not a vote on the recommendation, but just a vote on changing the agenda to include that. So all those in favor, if you could raise your hand or say yes. All those opposed, please raise your hand or say no. All right, so the motion passes. The agenda has been modified, and I'd like to do that after if there's any other questions or discussion on the presentation. So Peter?
I just, based on the conversation immediately previous to our discussion of the agenda, I wanted to say that I would want North Main Street to be rebuilt with a design that reflects Ann Arbor's values, not MDOT's values. That's very important to me. So do not want it rebuilt until we take control of it.
All right, Lisa.
My comments are along the same lines as Peter's. I share David's concerns about what we would get out of the reconstruction versus a city-led rebuild. I think the thought in my head is comparing it to like when you're having to pay money to undo someone else's bad kitchen renovation when you buy a house. not and I don't mean to apply that example to MDOT, but I'll note that like earlier in this meeting, contradiction with the city's core goals is something that was brought up. And I think to whether or not there is alignment with the city's core goals is a question that's come up quite a number of times in past agendas. So I'm thinking about the Liberty Bridge over I-94 repairs, as well as the US 23 bike ped access resolution. And I'll note too that the city of Ann Arbor and DDA have already been heavily engaged in trying to make improvements to some of these trunk lines. So I'm thinking about like the Huron Street streetscape improvements and redesign that was approved in 2018. So I feel like taking up this issue or considering these segments is really well aligned to work that's happened already. And I'm very excited about the prospect of the city getting to have more input in design of the segments themselves.
Thanks. Any other comments or questions? Well, then let's move on to our new agenda topic, which is a recommendation. It would be a recommendation to City Council from Transportation Commission that we recommend Council take up the effort and proceed with the effort to transfer all of these segments of us current state-owned trunk lines to the City of Ann Arbor. Would that be it, Molly, or did you want to get into any specifics about how or anything like that? Okay.
So moved.
Yep. Go ahead.
I was just saying, so moved. Like I've got this is my motion. We just need a second.
Oh, seconded by Peter. Okay. All right. So the motion is out there. Any questions or discussion on this recommendation?
Just one
yep,
quick
Lisa.
question.
Oh, yeah, Chris.
If I can have the motion reinstated, just so I'm capturing it correctly in the meeting minutes, please.
I can throw it like if you want. I'll just type it up.
Okay, you can put it in the chat or okay. We'll give you a minute. Lisa, did you have a question in the meantime?
Yeah, I think I just wanted to note that one other public concern I've heard around this is, I think there's a general perception among some residents of the city of Ann Arbor that our roads are generally terrible. And I've seen some concern raised of like, okay, if the city takes over jurisdiction of these segments, how are we going to know if we're getting, better than what we would get from MDOT? And I don't, I wondered if maybe this was a question for Raymond of like, sort of, is there anything you would share to people that have that concern or sort of, yeah, I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I might actually need to phone a friend with Nick on this one as well. We kind of touched on this briefly. There was not, the study did not afford the consultants the opportunity to do a full-blown engineering analysis, right? So we didn't do core samples. We didn't do all kinds of stuff. So we don't know how bad, the condition of the road is. And so you heard some of the assumptions that were made to go into this. Like Jake mentioned, North Main had sort of the most tangible project cost because there is a project identified out in 2027. And so that was used as kind of the baseline for what it would take to reconstruct that. But we don't have similar costs for Washtenaw. So there is kind of an unknown there. And maybe Nick, if you want to help fill in some blanks or correct the record on anything I may have said.
Well, I'll just say that what it really comes down to is the negotiation with MDOT and how much money, is transferred along with that, and either, whether it's money transferred to us so that we can make pavement improvements, or whether it's MDOT making pavement improvements. That's really what the crux of that is going to be in terms of improving the condition of the road itself.
Great. So I think what I'm hearing is, there's more room for negotiation around this or time to kind of identify some of those hypotheticals. I don't think the move of going to council, we're very far away from anything that seems binding. So, I'm at least supportive of moving this forward.
Matt.
Thank you. I'm not comfortable supporting the motion that Molly's put out, only because I'm only seeing this information for the first time tonight. The presentation is extremely high level, and I I just don't have I haven't had time to really understand the implications. I am a bit concerned the costs maybe haven't been presented in a way that I can make sense of as a technocrat. So I probably could get there with more time, but I haven't had that time this evening, so I'll probably just abstain. Thank you.
Thanks. Peter?
I was just going to add that if the negotiation isn't good, then council still has the opportunity to reject it. I mean, if MDOT comes back with a bad deal for us, then they won't say yes. And I guess that's kind of a question that would be part of the process, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Erica?
Erica,
you're muted.
That would be helpful. Following up on your comments, Nick, you mentioned we didn't have, Washtenaw in particular is a bit of an unknown in terms, and is there additional analysis that you would hope might be funded prior to going to MDOT for negotiations? Is there something that we should be thinking about in terms of the upcoming budget cycle that would give us more information and more knowledge in detail, thinking about how we might want to enter that with the most, a concrete information around the quality of the roads?
I think maybe a little bit more in-depth, dive into what is out there, what the history of the road maintenance, what the cross section is out there, maybe even some soil borings. If we need to determine what is really the right thing to do with the road in terms of improving the pavement, probably a little bit more data would be warranted. And I don't know how much that would be right now. It's off the top of my head, but I don't think it would be a humongous additional effort to gather that information.
Yeah, just to make a point that there's like two different things here. One is what you can expect to get from MDOT, and even if that road really should be reconstructed at this point, without them having something on the program, it is unlikely that is going to be their recommended treatment to get you 5 years of state of good repair. So I don't see that dollar amount will change too much from expect to get from MDOT. What it's going to cost you to redo that road is a higher number, if you're going to do it right, because it really needs more than what MDOT will give you to meet their meet the law, I guess, of what's required for them to do to bring it up to a state of good repair for 5 years.
All right, any other questions or comments before we vote? All right, so again, the motion is to recommend that City Council initiate the trunk line transfer process with all of the current MDOT controlled roads. All right, so all those in favor, please say yes or raise your hands. All right, all those opposed, please say no or raise your hand. And all those that abstain, please raise your hand or say abstain. All right, thank you. Looks like the motion passes.
Thanks for humoring me, everyone.
Oh, it's no humor. I think it's very important. If it didn't happen tonight, I think it would happen soon in the next meeting or two. So I was comfortable voting on it.
Brett, before we move on to the next item, I did just want to, first of all, thank the consultant team, but I did not do a good job of introducing Trevor. This is your first interaction with Trevor, I believe. Trevor is one of our transportation program managers or transportation planners. You Flowers in past meetings. Trevor is her counterpart. And so, a tip of the hat to Trevor also. He was kind of diving deep on this and asking a lot of difficult questions of the Sam Schwartz team to make sure that, it moved along. So I just wanted to formally introduce him as part of our team and someone who supports, Nick and I and all the work that we come to you and report on a monthly basis. So I didn't have a chance to do that earlier. I just wanted to take a moment to do that now.
Thank you very much. All right. So with that, Raymond, we have two more kind of big topics: the 2024 street resurfacing and the Miller Ave bike network topics. Should we consider bumping one of those to next month? And if so, which would you recommend? If not, we can try to plow through. We'll probably go late, but what kind of recommendation do you have?
Well, I think both of them are timely, but there isn't any immediate kind of action. I will say I think Miller has some things on the more immediate horizon. Nick, you can speak to the resurfacing program. I think that is what's still out to bid. But the project slate is pretty much defined and is somewhat dependent upon the bids that come back. So it's probably 6 of one, half dozen of the other. We can try to muscle through real quickly, or if you want to pick one, I think, I don't know if you want Nick and I to thumb wrestle over it or what have you, but
I think given the time, I think it might be a good idea to pick one. And in that case, it sounds like the All Ages and Abilities Bike Network and Miller Ave would be probably the more important given timing. Is that, or Nick, do you want to get out the street resurfacing presentation this month?
Doesn't matter to me. My presentation is just the annual kind of update of what's
Right.
What our road resurfacing program looks like and what's coming up for this year. So that's all it is.
Yeah, and I think last year we did that as late as April. So to do it in March wouldn't be too much later than we've done historically. We tend to like to do it in February just before the construction season kicks off. But yeah, if Nick's okay with it, I'll go ahead with the All Ages and Abilities and Miller discussion. I know there was some interest in this topic voiced at the last meeting, so I also want to be responsive to that as well.
Good. Okay. Do we need to? Peter. Yep.
I was going to move that we scratch the resurfacing from the agenda for tonight.
Okay. Seconded. Thank you. Vote to amend the agenda to move the 2024 street resurfacing and related projects topic to probably next month. If yes, say yes, or raise your hand. If you oppose it, please say no or raise your hand. All right, that passes. So, all right, let's skip over that topic. Sorry, Nick. And move on to the All Ages and Abilities Bike Network and Miller Ave topic. Last year, we got a presentation on the All Ages and Abilities Bike Network as identified in the Moving Together Towards Vision Zero Transportation Plan. Tonight, Raymond is going to give us a quick refresher on the facilities and then inform us on the current plans for Miller Ave. So, Raymond?
All right. Is the PowerPoint showing? Actually, it's technically a PDF. All right, yeah, so again, just kind of, we gave a sort of overview of the All Ages and Abilities Bike Network last time, and I wanted to kind of just quickly refresh you all on what, that concept is as identified in our transportation master plan known as Moving Together Towards Vision Zero. So, this will advance. Oh, now it advanced too much. All right, so one of the first maps we reference on almost any capital project is the All Ages and Abilities Bike Network map that is pictured here on the screen. It's a fairly robust network of proposed bicycle facilities. Some are existing, but most of them are not yet existing. We do have some internal targets to install 5 miles of new or upgraded All Ages and Ability routes each year. complete the full all ages and abilities bike network in about 10 years and implement and this is all part of the sort of pillars of the plan related to safety, mobility, and healthy people and sustainable places. When we dig down, if you look at the plan, and again, this is a very high level cursory overview, so forgive the brevity, but you know, the all ages and abilities bike network, it's not a one size fits all approach. It's really a function of what is the characteristic of that roadway, what is the context of that roadway, and what would be an appropriate facility to encourage people to bike along. So for local streets, you know, neighborhood streets, things like that, it may be something as simple as shared lane markings or bicycle boulevard treatments, which is the picture that's pictured below that, which in this instance, a bike boulevard may include something like a traffic diverter, which is what's pictured there, where cars are discouraged from passing through or cutting through a street, but bicyclists and pedestrians can do so. Minor streets, such as maybe minor collectors, things that, you know, have 25 to 30 miles per hour, 10,000 vehicles or less. We're looking at kind of maybe just a striped or painted bike lane. If we can fit it, maybe a buffered bike lane, and then we even talk about contraflow bike lanes in those situations as well. And then major streets, which Miller is a major street, so just keep that in mind. We really do look for a higher magnitude type of facility. So really what we're trying to do is a high comfort facility that provides some sort of separation from the motorists and the bicycle users through a protected bike lane. So sometimes you'll hear us use words like separated bike lane or cycle track or protected bike lane. All of those are fairly interchangeable. The idea is it's, you know, the buffered bike lane is just paint on the road, but a protected bike lane adds some sort of vertical separation. So maybe it's concrete island, maybe it's vertical delineators, plastic posts, something that gives an actual physical separation between the motorists and the cyclists beyond just paint. There are raised bike lanes that are identified in our plan. We don't really have there are sections of First Street, which you can consider a raised bike lane, but it's also a sort of protected bike lane. So it's sort of a hybrid in that space. And then, you know, off-street shared use paths or multi-use paths, like the border to border trail. Two other documents that guide our work. The map on the left is our safety corridors. You'll oftentimes hear us refer to tier 1 and tier 2 corridors. These are corridors where we know the crash patterns out there are crash patterns we are not very excited about. And so we've highlighted those in the plan as areas of focus. And again, you know, there are a lot of red lines on the map, there are orange lines on the map, and there are also some purple dots on the map in terms of where intersections are that we might want to focus in on. And so, you know, again, just I'll circle back on this in a second, but you'll see that Miller is identified as a tier 1 safety corridor, meaning we would want to do safety improvements along that corridor. And then the third map that helps guide our work, it really talks about where some of these things overlay with planned capital projects. So we often try to be opportunistic in our work to say that instead of us always just chasing a project, maybe we can look to see if there's an existing project that's programmed that we can piggyback off of. And so that's what this speaks to. So this way it really allows us to stretch our dollars further and to accomplish multiple outcomes with a single capital project. So when you kind of layer all of these maps on top of one another, you'll see that Miller keeps kind of getting highlighted, right? So Miller is identified as a proposed all ages and abilities bike network. It currently has a bike lane, but it does not have any vertical separation. So therefore it's kind of, you know, not really meeting our target design, given the characteristic of the roadway, that it would really, the plan calls for a higher order facility. It is also a tier 1 safety corridor. So, you know, what are the things we can do to improve safety along that corridor? In particular, how can we drive down speeds? You know, you've heard me say time and time again that speeds are, you know, pretty much the one of the most significant determinant factors in crash severity. And so a long stretch of road like Miller that has no control along it, you know, cars tend to pick up speed along the way. And then lastly, there's that capital project, right? There is a capital project programmed for Miller between Chapin and Newport It's a water main project and a stormwater project. That segment is kind of in the middle, right? The existing Catherine cycle track ends at first. So the Newport to Chapin doesn't connect to anything. So when we talked about the need to incorporate a bike facility, an improved bike facility in that project, we said, well, we also need to make sure it connects to something. We can't just have a sort of floating island of a bike facility out there. So at a minimum, we look to extend it to the east, to connect to the DDA's Catherine Miller cycle track. But then we also said, well, Newport may not make the most sense for a terminus because Newport is not, signal controlled. And I think Newport does have some bike infrastructure, but it might be good to run it further to the west to connect to Maple as well. So with that as a kind of teeing up the issue for Miller, one of the things to note is, all of these documents, all of these maps kind of pointed us to, we need to do something along Miller, right? I mean, we have 3 different maps in the plan that highlight Miller. So what are the things that we can do? So the first thing we did is we kind of looked at, what is it within the realm of possibility? And one of the things to note is Miller is a fairly constrained corridor. You'll see the pictures on the map show, and these are just taken from Google Street View, so no magic here. The first is the picture to the left shows that Miller measures across roughly 30 to 32 feet across from curb to curb. This is right by West Park, but I will tell you that this sort of cross section is pretty consistent the whole length of the corridor. It's about 30 feet under the railroad viaduct, further to the east by First Street, and it's about 30 feet, as you approach Maple as well. There are some places where it broadens out a little bit, especially where there's on-street parking or where there might be a left turn lane. But by and large, the majority of the road width from curb to curb is about 30 to 32 feet. One other thing I'll note, I skipped over it, in the upper right-hand corner, I have a $sign there. And one of the things is when we kind of scope creeped the project beyond just that existing capital project to make sure it connected to other facilities, we had to figure out how to pay for it, right? Because there was no existing capital project that was teed up. And so we were looking at some of our funding sources like the American Rescue Plan Act or ARPA. We were looking at the Safe Streets for All. We were looking at climate millage to see what sort of things we could stack on top of one another to fund some of these improvements. And I only bring this up because there is an upper limit to that, right? Some of those dollars are being spread across multiple projects. And so trying to make sure we can find a solution that fits within our budget is always a challenge for us as well. So to give you a little bit of an impression about what the sort of existing roadway looks like, and then I'll flip over to the next slide, which will show what we're thinking, what's proposed. Now, I will say these concepts are still under development, so you're getting kind of the first sneak peek at them. We will have public engagement on this in March, but this is kind of where our thinking is at right now. So again, if you think about 30 foot from curb to curb, that's not a lot of room to work with because at a minimum, we need to have 10-foot travel lanes for vehicles. But on Miller in particular, we need to try to accommodate transit because the AAA-ATA does run transit on Miller. So we need to be respectful of that. We've heard from the ride that they would prefer a minimum of 10.5 feet travel lanes because buses measure 10 feet from mirror to mirror, and Matt can help confirm that. So if you're that tight on the corridor, there's concern about the mirrors on the buses hitting other mirrors on other buses, or even, people who are on the side of the road, like cyclists. So they want a little bit of shy distance. So 10.5 feet or 11 feet is preferred when transit is running along the corridor. So, again, just think about that. 30 feet, you already have 20 to 22 to 23, well, 20 to 22 feet is pretty much spoken for. And all that's left is 8 feet if you're talking about curb to curb. And that's pretty much what the existing profile looks like. You have roughly 10.5 foot lanes and roughly 5 foot lanes, bike lanes. So 10.5 foot travel lanes for vehicles and 5 foot bike lanes for cyclists, including, I believe, the gutter pan. And that's about as much room as there is within the existing curb. When we look at the potential of what we could possibly do to reconfigure, we could try to gain a few feet if we were to combine the bike lanes on one side of the road and continue the existing DDA cycle track on the south side of the road further to the west. Now, you might say, well, what's the point in that? Again, if we are trying to get some sort of buffer that we can put vertical separation in, if we have to do that on both sides of the street, we run out of room very quickly, especially if we want to maintain an adequately sized bicycle facility. Yeah, I could put in a 2-foot bike lane, but that's substandard and wouldn't meet the criteria if I need a 2-foot buffer, right? So that's the challenge that we're up against. When we put the 2 bike lanes together, we only need to solve for buffer one time. And in that buffer, then we can put in vertical delineators. We can sometimes put in concrete, whatever the case may be, to provide that physical separation. So again, in the what you see here, there's an aerial with a sort of concept that shows, you can see the existing condition kind of underlaid. But the center line kind of moves further to the north because you're accommodating the cycle track on the south side of the road. There would be a very narrow buffer, maybe 2 feet, maybe 1 feet, depending upon what treatment we put in there. And then in doing that, we can combine the bike lanes so you can get 8 feet total for a bi-directional facility, 1 to 2 feet of buffer, and then still maintain those 10.5-foot travel lanes. And all that still adds up to between 31, 32 feet, depending upon which section we're talking about. In other there are some sections of Miller that I mentioned are a little bit wider. So this is near Franklin, where there's some on-street parking. The road widens out to about 37 feet in this space, 37 to 38 feet. That makes sense because a parking bay or on-street parking is roughly about 7 feet wide. So again, all we did was we took that 30 feet curb to curb, bumped it out a little bit to add those on-street parking spaces for that additional 7 feet. So we have a little bit more room to work with. And so, that existing profile right now, there's just 2 travel lanes, again, 10.5 or 11 feet, depending upon where we're at, 5-foot bike lanes, and then that on-street parking for 7 feet up against the southern curb. For those wider cross sections, we actually might be able to do a different type of buffer treatment. So again, we would still have 10.5 or 11-foot travel lanes in each direction for motor vehicles. We might be able to widen the bike lane a little bit, maybe upwards of 10 feet, as opposed to what I said before, 8 feet. And then we could also have a wider buffer, a concrete possible buffer, like little concrete islands. It could maybe be as wide as 5 feet, again, depending upon what the cross section is in that particular roadway. So again, I caution you not to take the street mix design, too literal, because it really depends on which block we're talking about. But by and large, this is fairly reflective of some of the thinking that where we're currently at. A couple of things to note: we did contemplate a raised bike lane as part of this. You saw me mention earlier that raised bike lanes were a design concept. However, without any sort of buffer between the raised bike lane and the vehicular travel lane, we did not think it would provide the level of comfort that cyclists would, come to enjoy if there was physical separation. I think you've heard me use this anecdote before. I'm a fairly confident cyclist, but the way I bike is different than by myself than when I have my 12-year-old daughter in tow. And having a 4-foot bike lane that's raised, an inch or two above the pavement level of the motor vehicles with no additional buffer doesn't feel that much more robust than what's currently out there. We also looked to see if we could squeeze in, directional against curb, single bike lanes against the curb, single direction with buffer. And we could not find a way to get the space we needed within the existing curb to curb profile to provide that buffer and provide that physical separation. So then the follow-up question is, well, why can't we bump the curb out? Well, if you go back to one of the previous slides, there are a couple challenges. First of all, there's the cost slide. For every bit of curb we move, it's not just about moving the curb, but it's about moving all of the underground stormwater infrastructure. There's a sort of domino effect that once you touch that curb, you touch everything that's underneath it. And all of a sudden that drives your costs way up. The other thing, and this picture is a good example, but it's not too atypical along the whole corridor, is there's a fairly significant amount of trees along Miller. And the more we move the curb, the more impact there would be to those trees. And we found on many other projects in the past that trees are fairly well coveted in the city, and we try to be very careful about which trees we propose for removal. Sometimes it's unavoidable, but we try to minimize that impact as much as possible. All right. A couple other considerations that I wanted to bring to your attention. Firstly, we've not completely solved for this yet. We are working with the design consultant, HRC, on it currently, but we are looking very closely at the intersections. In particular, 7th and Miller, there's a good chance that we're going to propose a bike signal. I wouldn't be surprised if a bike signal is proposed at Maple as well. Part of it is just trying to make sure that we ensure the safety of the cyclists as they go through those intersections. And making sure that the right of way is very clear between the motorists, the cyclists, and the pedestrians. We are also looking critically at whether those existing turn lanes are needed. So, for example, at Newport and a couple other intersections, the road widens just a little bit just to accommodate a left turn lane. Newport might be tough to get rid of because you have schools, but then you also have the water treatment plant, which accepts large trucks to haul away some of the waste from that. So, being able to accommodate some of those movements sometimes is challenging if if the intersection is shrunk down too much. And then, as is typical practice, we're also looking at green pigmentation or green pavement markings where there are those sort of conflict points to bring added awareness to where motorists and vehicles may interact. This probably would not be applied to every driveway, but would be at the approaches to intersecting streets. I mentioned that this was a Tier 1 safety corridor. So in addition to the bike lane, we are considering speed management strategies. Again, we haven't settled on what those are, but we think that the bike facility itself will have a sort of traffic calming effect. We've seen that with other projects, but we may consider traffic calming type elements along the corridor as well. Those are to be determined in terms of what those might be. But we recognize that Miller could benefit from lowering the speeds and getting vehicles to drive slower along that. You heard me say on the onset, Miller is one of these challenging sort of neighborhood arterials that is long, straight, and has no, control, no natural sort of things that slow down vehicles. And so absent that, we want to make sure that we are mindful of how to make sure that cars are driving appropriately and driving slowly along the roadway. I did touch on this in the last slide, but some of the proposal would probably result in on-street parking removal. Not all of it. There is parking. There are kind of parking cutouts in certain segments on the north side of the road. We anticipate that those would stay. But on the south side of the road where the cycle track is going in, it's really hard to accommodate parking when you have that bicycle facility. We tried once a floating parking lane on Division, and that did not work. And so we think that we can, repurpose that space to make a more comfortable bike facility through there. And then one other thing I wanted to note is we did get a Highway Safety Improvement Program grant a couple years ago to improve the crosswalks west of Newport on Miller to upgrade those with rectangular rapid flashing beacon signs. So those are the yellow signs with the flashing lights. So that grant is there. This will be incorporated into the project. So those crosswalks will receive an upgrade as well. One thing I will note, though, is a lot of those crosswalks right now have pedestrian refuge islands in the middle of the roadway. Some of those may have to be reconfigured as part of, this sort of confined space that we're talking about. Maybe the pedestrian refuge island is more situated between, the cycle track and the vehicular travel lanes, but with the accompaniment of the rectangular rapid flashing beacons, there's still a safety upgrade that would be incorporated into the project. Again, it's just a question of, what we can fit within the space that we have afforded to us. So I think, and then just wanted to quickly touch on next steps. We are currently working through a public engagement strategy on this. One of the first things that we expect is that as part of the downtown area circulation study, which is occurring from March 12th to March 14th, We will have some information and seek some input on the Miller project, because Miller is one of the sort of feed-ins to the downtown area circulation study. Another thing to note on these workshops is it's a combined effort with the downtown area circulation study and the city's comprehensive plan. So if you don't have this marked on your calendar yet, March 12th, 13th, and 14th at the downtown library, please do so. I think there's going to be a lot of interesting information for you, regardless of where your interests are, whether it's land use or whether it's transportation, so forth and so on. The link is on this website, but it's also in the monthly update that I'll go over in just a few moments as well. And then the other thing I was going to say is we are looking to an accompaniment piece related to engagement that will probably include, online surveys, some informational materials or videos, as well as some office hours for people to come in. And these would be virtual. People can log in and connect with us and kind of talk through some of the concepts, and we can explain how we think all of this is going to operate. So with that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to entertain any questions you may have.
Erica.
Thank you. And thanks so much for that presentation. That's really helpful. I have one question, then I wanted to direct a question towards the commission at whole. In terms of the public engagement, you mentioned the downtown planning stuff that's happening March 12th, 13th, and 14th. I know there's neighborhood engagement kind of related to this I think there was supposed to be neighborhood engagement. Is that anticipated later in the spring, a specific sort of neighborhood public engagement?
Well, what we've identified preliminarily is postcard notifications specifically to the neighborhood, alerting them to some of these engagement opportunities. Okay, so maybe not necessarily a separate breakout, but to really invite them to participate, make sure that they're aware of some of these concepts.
Okay, perfect, thanks. So one of the reasons that I wanted to make sure that Transportation Commission heard about this project, I think we've received some public comment on this as well, and to back up, I'm very excited about this project. I think it's exciting. It's our first opportunity to have a cycle track outside of the downtown. Miller has, I was elected in 2020. One of the first things that people, even when I was running, I was hosting meetings with the city to discuss concerns of folks living along Miller regarding speeds and speed management and real desires for improved safety in the neighborhood. And so this would help facilitate lower speeds and really build out our all ages and abilities network. So I am very excited about this project and the proposal as it's currently iterated. However, there has been a little bit of advocacy concern in the community. Washington Bicycling and Walking Coalition has put out a statement asking, one, that Transportation Commission specifically discuss this project. And so so it's coming to you. So I think it's a good piece, and I wanted to make sure that folks were discussing it. There were questions, I think, around why not buffered bike lanes, which I think was being presented in this situation. But I wanted to especially before this project proceeded further, see if there was, if that concern was shared amongst this commission as well, or, I don't think that this level of detail was out in the community when that statement was articulate either. So I just wanted to provide a little opportunity for the commission to be able to discuss and get some feedback on that as well, because I know this will be a point of that will be raised by residents.
Yeah, Peter.
Well, to Erica's point, back in olden days when there was non-motorized transportation only on one side of Scioto Church, and I was a young parent, I had a close call with one of my kids with someone exiting the neighborhood as we were on the contraflow side of the street, and they were looking left while they were turning right. And I had a close call that like haunts me to this day. And my kids are, you know, they're almost adults now, and they get tired of me telling them, you know, whenever we are on the wrong side of the street, you know, there are still places nearby like Oak Valley that only have non-motorized facilities on one side. And whenever we're on the wrong side, I'm telling them, you got to be extra careful of people coming out of driveways right now, because they're not going to be looking in the right direction for you. They're tired of hearing it, I'm sure. But I look at this design and I just can't get away from the fact that we're going to have traffic. We're going to have non-motorized traffic going in the opposite direction of vehicle traffic. And there are so many side streets and driveways, so many opportunities for people to do this looking left while turning right. And I don't see enough in the plan to convince me that that's not going to happen. And I guess I will also add, importantly, that we had a crash in 2022 at Pioneer on North Main that really, it looks like it's this exact scenario. At the time, we only had non-motorized facilities on the southbound side of North Main, and we had a cyclist going northbound, and they got hit by a vehicle exiting Pioneer and turning. And I don't see what's in this plan that's going to stop that. And if buffered bike lanes on both sides don't fit, then we need to do something else. I mean, I'm not comfortable with the contraflow traffic on one side of Miller. So that's my opinion on this plan.
Thank you, Matt.
Oh, thank you, Raymond. Some interesting ideas here. Technical question. How could we maintain level boarding for wheelchair users with either of these ideas? And I'm just curious how that could be done.
Yeah, we would look to do something similar to what the DDA, has worked with the Ride-On for some of the downtown cycle tracks. So there's a good chance that the cycle track itself would kind of elevate up to curb level. So then that way, as Matt is speaking, that in order to deploy the ramp, it needs to be kind of at curb height. It can't be down at, road height. So we would look to do that in most instances. I know there's been some discussion already about looking at bus stops, where they're located, how they would interface with this sort of design. So some of those conversations have begun. I don't think we've entirely solved for it yet, because we're probably, I don't know where we're at, but we're probably at like 50% design. So it's, a lot of those details are still to be worked out.
Great, thank you.
Erica.
And I know I wanted to return to what Peter's comments just were. Do you think this is the first time that we've considered doing an all ages and ability facility like this outside of the downtown? We do have these existing in the downtown area already, and what we've seen from our safety data there is that it's improved. Crashes have decreased. And so I do want us to be cognizant that our local data on this demonstrates improved safety, not decreased safety, in a much busier urban environment of the downtown. Also, this cycle track is proposed to be on the south side of the road, which is important to know that those who would be going against traffic flow would be going uphill, which is a little slower moving traffic, which is an important consideration. And the school traffic, which is, I think, the most dangerous traffic that's out on the community, is on the opposite side of the street. But I would like, Raymond, would you mind speaking a little bit to, I know that these are some considerations that staff has thought about in terms of those, those safety considerations, and how you're weighing that from a more technical perspective.
Yeah, and they definitely are things that are top of mind for us, right? I think, first and foremost, finding ways that we can get the speeds to come down on Miller is the primary consideration. So then that way, as a reminder for everyone, I know you all know this, but Vision Zero does not claim no crashes. It's trying to minimize the severity of those crashes. So if we can get vehicles to slow down along the corridor, the likelihood of those crashes being severe or fatal is greatly reduced. So I think that's a primary consideration. The other thing too is, when we looked at some of the literature, both the literature provided by Walk Bike Washtenaw and others, we do find that these sort of bi-directional cycle tracks are increasingly being added to toolkits, right? I mean, these are identified in some best practices such as NACTO, the National Association of City Transportation Officials, and even some of the updated resources that were cited also refer to bidirectional cycle tracks for many of the reasons that I cited in terms of, they have the ability to attract more cyclists because of a high comfort facility. And then as Erica said, they are proving to be, based on the DDA's studies of the downtown cycle tracks, they are showing some safety benefit as well. So, we are very cognizant of, Pete's concerns, and I think they're well founded. Anytime you have that sort of contraflow operation, it's something to be very mindful of. But it is something that we, are trying to factor into the design and making sure that we're designing those intersection approaches as, as safely as possible to ensure that all users of the corridor, that their safety is elevated and improved over the existing condition.
Hey, Raymond, is there a number, how wide does a buffer need to be to get in some form of a vertical delineator? Is it 1 foot, 6 inches?
Yeah, that's a good question, because that's one of the things we've had a lot of discussion about. One of our initial concepts, it was, and Trevor can attest to this because Trevor is also helping with this project as well. He has a lot of fun ones. We do a lot of baptism by fire in the city. So we wanted to do a ribbon concrete curb the whole length of the project. But what we were finding in talking to the design engineers is that sometimes if it's too narrow of a space, that will eventually start to shift and maybe even move over time in a way that would not be conducive to the bicycle infrastructure. And in those instances, they were kind of saying, well, we probably need about 3 feet minimum for a concrete curbed section. We looked at a 1 foot with like 1 foot tapers on each side, but then it was going to lead to some heaving and some other issues that we were kind of concerned about. So we are now looking at a different quick curb sort of concept, which would be less than 1 foot wide. Quick curb, if you're not familiar with that product, I'm sure you've all seen the in-road pedestrian crossing signs, those paddles, we call them R1-6s. That's the technical term in the manual and uniform traffic control devices. But there's a small section, like a little black curb that those sit on. You can actually string those together. Those are meant to be an actual curb. They can come in 8-foot sections. And then you can put any number, different types of delineators on them. So not necessarily like the paddles that you have out there now, but maybe the bollards like you see on William could be incorporated into the project. So we're looking at that as a way to contemplate like about 1 foot wide to help, that foot, then that extra space could be given back to the bike lane probably to make sure that we have adequate width for those facilities.
Okay. Lisa.
Thank you. To piggyback on Matt's question around deploying wheelchair ramps, to what extent have city staff considered, general impacts potentially on wheelchair users and or seniors, older adults? So I'm aware, AATA Route 32, it goes by the Kroger, it goes up Miller. I'm thinking of like the seniors with the grocery cart and you know, whereas you would have had a buffer of a bike lane on both sides. Now, if you're going home on one side of the street, you're closer to traffic. Yeah, so I think I'm just wanting to hear more about what's been considered with respect to kind of those two populations, wheelchair users and seniors.
And I think, Lisa, correct me if I'm wrong, you're speaking to, especially, you know, as pedestrians, right? When they're in the
correct, non-bicyclists.
Yeah. So yeah, you know, there's no work proposed for the sidewalk or the lawn extension. Most of this area does have, you know, green space between the sidewalk and the curb. It varies. In some places it widens quite a bit, but I would say most of the way it's probably, you know, 4 to 5 feet, which is fairly typical. So while the vehicles on the north side of the road or westbound will be closer to that sidewalk, there still will be, you know, that sort of tree plot or lawn extension between the sidewalk and the curb. Same on the south side, there actually be that much more distance, right? You would have that lawn extension plus kind of the double bike lane for, you know, upwards of 10 additional feet, 12 feet, or whatever the case may be. And then the other thing to note is we will be sensitive to the public right-of-way accessibility guidelines, PROAG, which pretty much means making sure everything is ADA accessible, so that if we do put in a landing ramp for transit, that it connects to the sidewalk, right? That, you know, it's not just going to dump into a lawn extension and grass, so that people who are in wheelchairs will be able to access the pedestrian facilities that are there. So that would be, you know, something we would, there's some concrete work that would have to be required as part of the project.
Okay, great. And I'm not sure, you know, does this plan make things, you know, in any way measurably better or worse in like the scenarios, say, ride sharing service accidentally drops a wheelchair user off in the street and they need to get back up onto the curb? This is something I've come across in a couple of situations recently. So I think sort of the consideration is sort of like curb cutouts, or, well, we're not changing the curb really, so I guess.
Right. Yeah. So anywhere there's an existing driveway, you know, we have to allow continued access to that driveway.
Okay.
Right? So, you know, even in the, I didn't really highlight it, but let me see if I can just quickly do that. So for example, in, you know, this instance, let's say, for example, this dark line on the bottom represents the quick curb. You still have a break in that quick curb for this driveway here. So that is a consideration. And then where it widens out, even these little islands that would be put in still have to allow access to those driveways. So in theory, if someone gets, you know, dropped off, they would be able to kind of access it, you know, through the driveway if they're in a wheelchair. Or, you know, ideally the ride share would pull into the driveway, right? And let the person in a wheelchair off closer to their front door.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Sorry, I'm new to some of this, and I think too, just the idea of putting up the protections for the cycle track makes me think like, is that going to impede pedestrians who are used to getting across the street at a particular location at a particular time? But thank you, that was helpful.
All right, anyone else? I look forward to seeing what the public engagement brings forward, and please, everyone, feel free to participate in the surveys and the public engagement sessions that are to come. All right, let's move on then to staff report and updates. Raymond, staff report.
Thank you for that, Brett. And then maybe for Lisa's benefit, every month we give kind of a status update of transportation projects. We don't necessarily report on every project every month if there isn't any notable benchmark or accomplishment, but you'll see things kind of pop up and then pop off the list. This time of year tends to be a little quieter because construction activity hasn't begun. But come about May, you'll start seeing the list get a lot longer for all the updates in terms of where construction projects are. So what I'd like to do is just quickly go through and highlight the changes from last month to this month. Under the street resurfacing project, some resurfacing is expected to occur on Burwood, Page, Northbrook, and Yost. Stay tuned on this. This is what Nick was going to present on, so you'll get a lot more information on this next month. State and Hill is projected to begin in March of 2024, so next month, a couple weeks from now. Miller Avenue, we just talked about. There is also the URL for the Miller Ave project if you need that. And then I think later on in the staff update is another website for those public engagement opportunities related to the downtown area circulation study. So you can bookmark both of those on your favorites list. Here it is right here. So I've already mentioned some of this. Downtown area circulation study partnered with the comprehensive plan. We'll be talking about Miller as well. Here is the website. It's on the DDA's website, but it'll give you the whole itinerary of when the public engagement is happening. So please check that out. I've also spelled them out here as well. Trunk line transfer, you got the update today, so I don't need to go over that again. MDOT coordination, I do want to highlight that there are some public engagement opportunities ongoing related to two important projects within the county. The first is US 23, which this commission passed a resolution on, which was approved by council, encouraging MDOT to rethink the project and spend more time focusing on less vehicle capacity expansion and more bicycle pedestrian connections. So you can reiterate your thoughts, whether it be that or anything else, through these virtual public houses or virtual open houses. I'm sorry. And then M17, which is Washtenaw from US 23 to Ypsilanti. They also have what they call a planning and environmental linkages study underway to look at what that roadway should look like. So there are opportunities to engage on both of those. They also have comment forms and mapping tools in that space as well. So those are also linked in your monthly report. I also did provide a link to the resolution that council passed, I think back in, what was that, November, which you can refer back to as well. DT streetlight outages, 240 repaired so far in 2024. We'll keep you updated on that. Traffic calming, you approved a bunch of things tonight. I will note that the subcommittee has kind of reconvened. We had a meeting earlier this month. We have another meeting next week. Or no, I think it's this week, this Friday, where we are sharing some of our ideas that staff has been generating to implement that resolution with Councilmember Briggs, Councilmember Ackman, and I'll note that Brett Hadamaki is transitioning on as Molly Kleinman transitions off. Excuse me, I'm tongue-tied tonight. All right, quick build projects. The 2023 project is still continuing to advance on design. We're also looking at environmental clearances as well. We have shifted this project over to the Safe Streets for All grant. This is the $4 million grant that was awarded last year, but which we just got the grant executed last month. Part of the reason for that is these quick builds align nicely with what Federal Highways wants to see with this project, because it's not major capital projects, it's paint and post sort of things. So it's a good fit. Bike corrals, again, you've heard us report on this. If you know of folks that want public bike parking by taking an existing on-street parking space, let us know. We bought a bunch of bike racks and we've got no takers yet. So we're always looking for interested folks to ask us for those. Complementary to this, Trevor and his intern are working through a bike parking inventory. We have a pretty good handle on where bike parking is downtown, but most of the bike parking outside of downtown is on private property. You know, it's in front of a grocery store, it's in front of a restaurant, or whatever the case may be. So trying to understand where there are gaps in bike parking is part of what this exercise is, which can also help inform the previous point I mentioned about where we could put additional spaces in. We are looking to update the bike map and maybe do a limited print run. Suzanne Flowers is working on that with Washtenaw County Parks. Carbon reduction program. We've reported to you in the past that we are working through a possible LED conversion. So taking all of the high pressure sodium lights, which are less efficient, upgrading them to a higher efficiency LED light. We ran a pilot in late December, early January. That public engagement is now closed, and we are in negotiations with DTE on what that execution will look like. And a couple of notes on education and encouragement. Suzanne and Cynthia continue on our team to do lunch and learns for all of city staff, focusing on how we can really operationalize the transportation plan and make sure that everybody has a sort of Vision Zero focus. So right now we're trying to focus on maintenance of traffic and some of the measures that need to be taken to better accommodate pedestrians and cyclists when sidewalks and or bike lanes are closed, and how we can better accommodate them moving forward. Suzanne was at Transportation Bonanza and gave a presentation on February 15th last week, and is also scheduled to give a presentation with Stacy Meekins, who joined us this evening on the trunk line transport for an Association of Pedestrian and Bicycle Professionals webinar in June. And then two last little announcements. Staff is engaged in the annual climate teaching event on March 10th. And Bike Month is May, but we have picked May 15th as what used to be called Bike to Work Day, but it's really Bike to Wherever Day now. And we're working through some of the community partners like the Bicycle Alliance and Walk Bike Washtenaw, and get downtown on how we can promote those events and really kind of build up, just some buy-in on that event. So, all right, with that concludes my update, and I'm happy to entertain any questions you might have.
All right, thank you, Raymond. All right, seeing none, and in the interest of time, let's obviously, of course, as always, if you have any questions, please email Raymond or Megan or myself, and we'll get those to the right people. Let's move on to the liaison reports. Any commissioners who specifically serve as a liaison to another body or organization. Now, if you would like to provide a brief report or update. Yeah, Matt.
Oh, hi, thank you. So just a quick update. You've seen in the press, there's been a lot of grassroots interest in the MDOT US 23 study. A great group has been formed with the name Trains Not Lanes. Very active here in the community, got a lot of public support, which is wonderful. About the same time they were coming together, the ride reached out to MDOT to ask them to help or ask them to consider including a transit or transportation demand management scenario in the alternative scenarios that they're considering for that study. We've had some discussions with Ann Arbor City Council and other bodies. Generally seems to be a lot of support for the idea, at a minimum, that MDOT should be at least considering a scenario like this as part of that study. So I know it's something that's been of interest to several members of this commission. I don't know if we have time for dialogue or anything about that, but we hope to have some conversations with MDOT in the future. Their public engagement period is open right now, and as recently as this morning, they reconfirmed that is exactly the kind of public feedback they're looking for. So if any of you do want to visit those links that Raymond had up a moment ago and just ask them to consider a public transit or TDM scenario, as well as their capacity expansion scenarios, I think that's a good first step methodologically to getting transit on the board. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, let's get to commission member communications. All commissioners are invited to provide reports and updates. Molly, yes.
Thanks, Brett. So this is my last meeting, and I just wanted to say a couple of things. I promise it won't take too long. But I really wanted to express my gratitude and also my some hopes for the future. So first, an enormous thanks to all of the transportation commissioners I've served with over the last 5.5 years. I've learned so much from my fellow volunteers about everything from accessible transit to the role and function of subcommittees. Shout out to Linda Diane. It's often thankless and invisible work, so I wanted to thank everyone. Speaking of thankless work, I also wanted to thank the city staff who have supported the commission, especially Kayla Coleman, who was there at the very beginning, Raymond Hess, who has been unflappably kind and cheerful in the face of everything that this commission throws at him, tonight included. Sorry, not sorry. And Chris Cespedes, whose behind the scenes work keeps things running smoothly. Also now my hopes for the future. I've thought about this a lot, and I want to focus on one thing. And I promise, I wrote all of this morning, like the extent to which this is like timely is unexpected, but it's time to stop studying and start doing. Less plan, more action. We already know that speed causes serious crashes. We also know that narrower streets, fewer lanes, and physical barriers work to slow drivers down and reduce both the number and severity of crashes. We have a beautiful transportation plan with a whole menu of treatments, including diverters, raised intersections and crosswalks, bicycle protected intersections, chicanes, and refuge islands. We just have to start using them. This means budgeting for implementation, not another study or plan. It means tracking not just pavement conditions, but unsafe conditions, and adjusting our funding priorities so that we never repair pavement without also improving safety. When we fix the damn roads, we have to fix them for everyone. That Ann Arbor has kept our pedestrian and bike crash rates steady while it's skyrocketing everywhere else in the country is an accomplishment, or almost everywhere else in the country. And I'm proud of whatever small part I and this commission may have had in contributing to that. But I know that we can do better. We have to do better. Let's fucking go. Thanks, everyone.
I think that's all very, very well said, Molly. I couldn't agree with everything you said more. So again, thank you so much for 5.5 years of service on this, and you really helped set the course for this commission. So much appreciated. And I know that we'll still see you and hear from you, I hope, to whatever extent you're able with all of your AADL responsibilities as well. But
thanks so much, Brett. Thanks, everyone.
All right, if there's nothing else from anyone else, let's end if there are no objections. Thanks for everyone for hanging on for this little bit longer than normal meeting, but let's adjourn the February 21st, 2024 meeting. No objections, seeing none, this meeting is adjourned. Thanks.
Hey, everyone.